Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Grace On, and I'm a business analyst at BizFlow and a co-inventor of our new software, BizFlow AppDev. Today I'm going to use it to walk you through a standard end-to-end form generation. In projects today, the goal is often to redesign or upgrade existing forms and applications using new and improved technology. With AppDev, a data-centric web application development software, we can create a working form with little to no coding, giving more power to business users, speeding up the time to market, and improving the repeatability and reusability of the form. Before diving into the actual form generation, let's go over the structure of BizFlow AppDev. It consists of three main tools: the Studio, the Project Manager, and the Data Modeler. Upon logging in, users are presented with the Studio. From here, they can then navigate to the Project Manager as well as to the Data Modeler. Most projects will start from the Project Manager, where we can create and manage our workspace. Within a workspace, we can create multiple projects, and within a project, we can create multiple forms and blocks. Once we've set up the workspace structure, the next step is to create the data needed for the forms. Through the Data Modeler tool, we can create, define, and organize the necessary data entities, after which we can map these to individual UI components to designate the look and feel of the fields for the end user. In addition, we can even define the finer details in the Data Modeler through entity relationships, lookup tables, and validation logic. Once the data entities have been created and tied to their UI components, we send those to the Studio, where we can then drag and drop the data entities to generate the actual form. Today's example is the US DS11 form. Many of you may have already seen this or even used it to apply for a US passport. Let's first take a look at the form to identify what data fields will need to be accounted for. Starting from the top, we see that field number 1 is name, consisting of first, last, and middle. From what we can see on the form, these are most likely text fields. If we then jump to field number 3, here we have to select either male or female for our answer. In BizFlow AppDev, we call these fields data entities, which we then map to what we call components, for example, a text box or a radio button, to determine the entity's UI. If you'd like to review the DS11 form in more detail, it is available on the travel.state.gov website. Now that we've reviewed the form we want to create, let's get started. The first tool we are presented with when we log into BizFlow AppDev is the Studio. To start, let's navigate over to the Project Manager tool. As mentioned before, we can create and manage our workspace here. Click on the Project Manager tab to open the tool modal. The left-hand panel of the modal shows us a library of workspaces that have already been created. In the rest of the modal, we have an inspector showing the details and access authority for the selected workspace, project, form, or block. To create workspace, I need to click on the blue Create New Workspace button. Remember, Workspace is the highest tier of the hierarchy. It goes Workspace, Project, Form, and Block. Form is the lowest layer that can still be published. Blocks are a part of the form, meaning we can drag multiple blocks to create one form, as well as reuse a single block in as many forms as we need. After our workspace structure has been set up, we need to go to the Data Modeler to create the data. Navigate over to the Data Modeler button on the top left of the Studio screen to open. Note that it opens as a separate browser. Let's first go over the layout of the modeler. On the top, we have tabs that allow us to navigate to the different tools within the Data Modeler. On the left, we have a library of projects that we can open and create data entities for. In the center, we have our canvas where we'll be creating our data entities, and on the right we have our inspector that shows us the information of the selected entity. To start, let's first identify and click on the name of our project. Now, before we move any further, we have to check out the project. This will allow us to make edits to it. Before checking out, it'll be read-only. Now that I've clicked the checkout button, the lock icon, all fields and buttons are activated. Let's create our data entities. Mouse over to and click the New Entity button. Now we have our new entity modal. Here, we have to type in certain identifying details of the data entity we are trying to create. the mandatory fields will be indicated with a red asterisk. Let's start with our name data entities. For the name of the entity, we'll put last. Description can be applicant's last name. Label is different from the entity name and indicates the text that will actually be shown on the form as the field's title. Lastly, every entity needs to be tied to a data type. In the case of name, since it's a free-form text field, we'll select string. As you can see, there are some additional hidden fields that may appear depending on the data type selected. Since we selected string, we have to define the data length of this entity. Let's put 50. Now that we've entered all of the mandatory fields, click on the Add button. And voila! We've created our first data entity, and we can see it in the library as well as on our canvas. Simple and easy. Next, I'll show you how we can group together multiple entities for a cleaner and more organized list. I'm going to quickly create the first and middle name entities and link these together in a name group. Now that we have our three name entities, I'm going to group these together. First, let's open the group modal by clicking on the New Group button. The name of the group will be full name, and the description will be applicant's first, last, and middle name. Now click Add. And there we have our group. To tie the entities to the group, first make sure that the group is selected, and then drag and drop the three entities one by one. Now let's create all other necessary entities. Before I jump off screen to quickly go through the rest, let's create one more entity together, this time with a different data type. Taking field number 3, sex, click New Entity to bring up the entity modal. Here I'm going to enter the name, description, and label fields quickly and jump down to type. Because the DS11 form gives us a list of predefined answer choices, we'll choose Lookup. Once we do that, we get two additional fields, Dependency and Lookup. Ignoring dependency for now, let's click on the Lookup field. Here we see a list of lookup tables that have already been created for us. Select Gender. Now I have created all necessary entities for the U.S. Passport DS11 form. Before we can use the entities to create the form, we first have to define their UI components. To do that, click on the Component tab. Here we can map each data entity to its corresponding UI component, such as an input box or a checkbox, which will determine the appearance of the field on the form. To begin, select an entity from the list on the center canvas. Let's start with our name entities. Click on First. Notice how a list of applicable component types appears in the inspector based on the data type of the selected entity. Since this is a free-form text field, let's expand the fields type and choose the input text component. To tie this component to the selected entity, drag and drop the component into the dotted drop zone. Make sure to click Apply afterwards. I'll go ahead and do the same for the remaining two name entities. Next, let's select date of birth. As you can see, with a different data type, we get a different list of component types. click on Calendar to expand and drag and drop the Date Picker component. Once again, we'll hit Apply. As before, I will now jump off screen to go through and match up the rest of the entities. When we're done, I'm going to publish the data to the studio so that we can use these to create a form. To do that, first, mouse over to the top right-hand corner and click on the Save icon. As you can see, saving activates the Publish button, so we'll go ahead and hit Publish. Now we're ready to create our form in the studio. To navigate back to the studio, close out of the Data Modeler tab by clicking the X icon. From here, let's open our blocks by mousing over to the left panel, clicking Webinar Workspace, then Project 1, then the Block tab, where we have the blocks I created before. For this form, let's start with Block 3. This block will cover between name and primary contact phone number. Before we begin creating this block, let's first go over the different parts of the studio. On the left, we have our library of forms and blocks, data entities, as well as the form layout components. In the center, we have our canvas, where we will be drawing our form by dragging and dropping our entities and components. And on the right, we have our UI and Entity Inspector. Now that we've gone over the navigation of the studio, click on the Component tab in the library and expand the layout and views. For this block, I'm going to use the Field Set component to contain the data entities. This component allows the end user to minimize and expand all of the entities within the field set. To add it to the form, drag and drop the component onto the canvas. To change the label of the field set, mouse over to the Attribute tab of the inspector, then type 1.name in the legend field. Next, we'll find the grid layout component from the library and drag it into the field set we just created. The grid layout component allows us to organize our data elements into rows and columns. Changing the layout can be done through the Attribute tab of the inspector. For this one, set the row as 1, column as 1, and, as with the Data Modeler, click Apply. We can also increase or decrease the width of the columns by changing the numbers in this window. Here, we see different size categories: extra small, small, medium, large, and extra large. These correspond to the size of the device monitor. For reference, the entire width of the canvas is 12. For this grid, since I want it to take about 2/3 of the canvas, I will change this to 8. Now let's add an additional grid layout beneath the previous, within the field set. For this, set the row as 1 and column as 2. And since we want the columns to take up the entire canvas and be of equal width, we'll set each at 6. Now let's add the data entities. Click the Project Schema tab in the library, then click on the Name data to expand it. Using the same drag and drop motions, we'll put last name in the left column, first name in the bottom left, and middle name in the right. Next, let's drag another grid, this time outside of the field set component. For this one, set the attributes to row 1, column 3, and the widths as 2, 2, and 8. Then, let's drag date of birth, sex, and place of birth into the columns from left to right. Lastly, let's drag another grid layout under the previous. Set it to the same row 1 and column 3. But this time, set the widths as 3, 6, and 3. This time, drag Social Security number, email, and primary contact phone number, once again from left to right. Now that we're done with block 3, let's save by clicking on the Save button on the top right of the screen. For the sake of time, I will create the rest of the blocks quickly off screen. Before we finish all the blocks and create our form, let's walk through some design features available in AppDev Studio in addition to the data entities and the UI components we've used so far. To do that, let's walk through creating block 1 together. This block corresponds to the section on the DS11 form displaying the title of the form information on the right, and the seal of the Department of State. Let's open block 1 by navigating over to the Block tab of the library and clicking Block. Next, click on the Components tab and drag and drop a grid layout to the canvas. As before, let's locate the Attributes tab of the inspector and set the grid as row 1, column 3, and widths as 4, 4, and 4. Now we'll go back to the Components tab and this time expand the Labels and select Image. Drag it into the left column. To set the image, let's go to the Attributes tab and enter the URL of a previously uploaded image to the source field. That's way too big, so we'll shrink it down by changing the style width to 50px. Once again, let's go back to the Components tab and expand Labels. Select the Label component and drag it into the middle column. To change the text, we need to go to the Attribute tab of the inspector and type Application for a U.S. Passport in the Label field. To match the format of the DS11 form, we need to set the font style as font-size to 14px and font-weight to bold. As a reminder, hit apply. Lastly, we need to add another label component to the right column. Go to the Label field in the Attribute tab and enter description from the DS11 form. Lastly, we need to add another label component to the right column. Go to the Label field in the Attribute tab and enter the description from the DS11 form. By setting the Use HTML label as true, we can actually use HTML language to format the text. Let's make the font smaller by setting the font style as font-size of 7px. With that, we've created block 1 using only UI components, not data entities. It's time to create our form. Just click on the Form tab in the library, then the name of the form shell we created through the project manager. Next, click on the Component tab in the library, expand Handler, and find the Embed Block panel. The next steps are very easy. Just drag and drop this component to the form and select the name of the block you want to add. Using the available preview functions on the top right of the screen, we can see the final form as an end user. With that, we've learned how to create a working form through BizFlow AppDev, the newest product as BizFlow. If you need more information, please check out our website at www.bizflow.com. Thanks for watching, and we hope you've enjoyed today's webinar.